Hey, everybody, this is a members preview for today's members episode. If you want to hear the whole thing and you're listening on YouTube, go ahead and hit the join button or the link in the description to become a member on YouTube. And if you're listening to this on the podcast feed, go ahead and become a member at the confessionalspodcast.com/join, and you can hear the whole episode today. All right, today we have Peter John on the show. Peter, what's going on, man?
Just a lot of fun stuff at my church.
Yeah.
We're in church right now. So
we're going to definitely get into that. Basically, so the audience understands, you had bought a church to move into and live in, and things were pretty stable for a little bit, and then things started going sideways. And we're going to talk about the experiences that you've had. And you know, you said you even have where you're sitting right now in the room, you have a mirror behind you so we could see if something shows up on the balcony. And you have your two dogs in the room because they tend to sense things and they will start barking. So if you hear the dogs barking, know things are happening. But we are going to start with your childhood story, which I found very interesting for a few reasons. And I'm not going to spoil it, but you and your brother experienced something weird involving the moon. I'll let you tell the story from there.
Well, it happened when I was about 3 or 4 years old. My brother's 13 months older than me. And we were in Milwaukee on 15th and Scott Street, and we had a upstairs apartment in a house. And my brother and I were playing around with our cereal, like we're like cream of wheat or whatever. And my mom's like, "You kids eat that. I'm going to go in the bathtub." And she went to go take a bath. We're sitting there, and you know how kids don't want to eat. So we're just goofing around, and we're looking out the window, and all of a sudden we see what looks like a daytime moon. And we've all seen the full moon during the day, and we're both looking at it, and it slowly moved in, like it was getting closer and closer, and it was getting bigger and bigger and closer till it was like almost right above the house across from us, taking up the whole entire window. And my brother and I both thought it was going to come to the window and hit us, and we both looked at each other at the same time, and we went, "Look," and pointed. And we then both realized we saw it. And we turned back and said, "Mom!" and screamed really loud. And by the time we turned back, it was back in the sky. Now, my brother and I thought that was both really weird about it. And my mom came out, and she was wearing a towel on her head, and she was fully dried off and dressed. And we talked about this years later. And I said to my brother, "Do you remember this? Did this?" And he's like, "Yeah, I remember it." And he remembered it vividly. And so we took it to our mom, and we're like teenagers now. And we're like, "Mom, do you remember this?" It's like, "Well, I remember you kids arguing or yelling or something." And she said it took about probably 10 to 15 minutes, just enough for her to, she's like, "Forget it. I'm going to just get my hair done, dry off and everything." So what seemed for us was mere seconds. For her was actually, she said about 10, 15 minutes. Which was really weird. And what we didn't understand is this wasn't like a UFO. This was like the moon with all the craters and everything else. And to this day, this was 50 years later, I still remember it. My brother still remembers it. And I asked my brother permission before I gave away telling the story, because I'm just trying to find somebody who has ever heard or saw something like this before. I've contacted Barton Nunley, and he's like, "Never heard of it." And a few other people. So I'm like, what's with the full moon coming at us? And it was over the house, and the loss of time, the fact it wasn't a typical UFO sighting. It was broad daylight. It was a full moon. My brother and I both vividly remember it. It was just weird.
I mean, definitely weird. So there's a few things where, you know, some people are gonna be like, "See, I told you the moon's fake." But I mean, as you have tried to make sense of it, before I pitch anything out, what have you ever come to any conclusion as to possibility as to what that was?
I still have no idea. It's one of those things like, I didn't it's you accumulate a lot of stuff, and you're like, you excuse it away after a while. It wasn't until I bought the church, and the church, like, I saw stuff, and I'm like, okay, that's not natural. And then you start going, if that's not natural, maybe this wasn't natural. And then you start realizing, whoa, that wasn't natural either. Whoa. And you realize the stuff that you put aside all of a sudden is in your mind going, I can't explain it. So yeah, it was one of those things where as a child, it didn't make sense to me. I put it aside. I remembered it when we were talking weird stuff in my teenage years. We talked about it again when I was like 40. And then we talked about it within the last few weeks. We
Mm.
both remember it very vividly. We remember every single detail about the place, about the circumstances. And my mom would remember it too, but she passed away in 2015. So it's just weird.
It's definitely weird. So all right, let me think. Which one do I want to go with first? All right, let me go with the easier one. Have you ever considered the idea that you and your brother saw is it possible that it could have been a UFO that you guys saw and mistaked it as the moon because it looks similar, and that's how your brains logically put it together?
I cannot tell you what it was. I've speculated over the years, is it a UFO that was cloaking itself? Was it kids having imagination? But then we are both having the same mass delusion at the same time, and then telling my mom about it. It was the moon, and
Yeah.
I can't explain it other than it was the moon.
So what you described, there's two other things that I'd like to pitch out to you. One could be a screen memory. Now, screen memories can be something that two people experience the same screen memory. Sometimes they have screen memories where they had an experience and they both remember something different. Most recently, I had a guy on the show. His name's Michael Cleland, and he's the owl guy. But he talks about people having interactions with interdimensional beings, alien, ET, UFOs, and they'll often have screen memories of impossibly large owls standing in front of them. In reality, it was probably not an owl; it was something else that they have a screen memory from. But in those situations, sometimes it will be two people, and one person will say, they saw a really large owl, and the other person will say they saw a dog. And both people are adamant that the other one isn't seeing what they saw. So I think those are examples of screen memories where they're different, but at the same time, I think that screen memories certainly could be placed in people that have the same memory, and that probably is ideal. So with that idea, have you ever had any missing time or anything attached to that situation?
Only that my brother and I don't remember the missing time. My mom said it was about she had enough time to finish washing her hair, getting the soap out, drying off, and coming out. And it was to us, it was like, look, and then we turned mom, and then we turned like this. That was all the time that it took for us. And so I would say it's missing time, but without being able to tell you, I can't. I was like 3 or 4.
Right. Okay. But yeah, it's hard to remember back that far. So the other option that I think of off the top of my head is geographical. And I think did you say that this happened in Milwaukee?
This was in Milwaukee, 15th and Scott Street.
Interesting. I'd have to go back and listen to the episode that I did with John. So there's a guy named John from a podcast called 21 CD Podcast. He had stopped for a while, but he just texted me the other day and said that he's starting his show back up. He dives into a lot of the weird stuff, and he does it on his own in more monologue format. He talks about topics. He's very good at speaking in a way that's engaging and digestible. So he was on my show. He recently moved back to Wisconsin, but he was living in Tennessee. So he came in studio. And the first half of the show, it was a public and then an overtime show. He had talked about his encounter with a Wendigo in Wisconsin, him and his brother, and I think they're friends.
I remember that episode.
Yes. So the overtime, he gets into a very weird, bizarre situation he and his brother found themselves in Milwaukee in an abandoned building where they liked urban exploring, and they went into the building, and as they went up through the floors in the building, things got weirder and weirder, as if like there was a shift around them. And long story short, because it was the entire overtime, probably 2 hour talk about this building. There's a really strong possibility that he and I landed on this idea that there could have been a realm shift that happened when they went through the building, whether the building had a portal of type inside that they walked through it by accident, or the realm around them shifted. But at one point, the idea of the building being weird was already in the bag. Like, they understood something's happening. And they look out a window, and when they look out the window, they're staring at the building that they thought they were that they went in. They went into a building, and somehow they wound up across the street in another building, looking at the building they went into. And it was very weird, bizarre. The only thing I could describe it as would be a realm shift. And I would suggest that possibly, maybe, like, I don't have answers, but is it possible that there was a realm shift for you and your brother where you guys experienced something that the people maybe around the city didn't experience like you experienced, because you would think that if that really did happen, there would have been a lot more people talking about it,
Exactly. And you're thinking, is it some kind of a illusion? It literally looked like a solid moon, and I can't explain it to this day. It freaks me out. I haven't told a lot of people in the paranormal world about
Paranoia
this.
too. It could be both.
I didn't really want to tell everyone about this, because if I did, what's going to happen is you're going to have a bunch of people copycat going, I remember seeing this too. And I just wanted to find out, did anyone else experience it? So this is the first time it's ever being told publicly, really, besides a few close friends. So,
wow. Well, I appreciate you sharing. And I do find it interesting for sure. I have never, that I can recall, heard somebody talk about the moon that way. I mean, I've heard it being hollow, the dark side of the moon's not real.
I've heard all those theories, and I've researched. I'm like,
right.
I'm a rational guy who doesn't. To me, I put it aside for years, going, I don't understand this. So,
well, at least one thing's for sure. I mean, you could certainly be lying about this, right? But for you, on your end of things, it's got to be good to know that you had the confirmation of your mother and what she recalls you guys calling out, but more so your brother, who just a few weeks ago confirmed to you that he has the same memory. So,
oh yeah,
you don't have to say that you're crazy.
We were sitting next to each other, and it was one of those things where if no one was there, you wouldn't tell anyone about it because nobody's going to believe it.
Right. And so I find that very, very compelling. The multiple witness experiences that people have, it adds a layer for the person receiving the story, like myself or the audience. It adds a layer of, man, it's not even like this guy is having a bad memory because he just confirmed it with his brother. So that's very interesting. Now, that story aside, let's fast forward through life. I mean, you've had different experiences throughout your life, but the main story that I want to hit on today is the church. Because when I first started the podcast, I think within the first 40 to 50 episodes, I had 2 or 3 episodes talking about people's experiences in churches and their haunting experiences. Now, this wasn't a church that they bought and they were planning on living in. These were churches they went to, and while they were there in the house of God getting ready to worship or worshiping, weird things happened. Now, since then, we've had other stories, really, really interesting stuff. And it was the introduction to me of seeing hearing people's experiences about churches and their hauntings that was just so far beyond my comprehension at the time. Now it's not, and it just makes more sense to me, when you talk about the spiritual.
In this case, it's a church that has been decommissioned, and it was built in 1910 by some German Lutherans. In 1950, they sold it to the VFW post on the condition alcohol could never be served here. They sold it shortly after because it's a VFW post. Then it was then used by like 2 different churches as who used it till they built bigger churches. This is a small little thing. Then it became like a craft store type thing that was called Kangaroo Pouch. And then that was used by a theatrical group for like a stage for a little bit. And then after that, what happened is it became a wedding chapel. The couple got divorced who were running it, and I bought it from the chapel.
Wow.
So
it's changed a lot of hands.
it's changed hands. The longest that ever had was the German Lutherans from 1910 to 1950. So, and
Gotcha.
that's the era that things seem to appear from, as far as most the people seem to be from. But as far as this church, I bought it not really. I bought it with the intention to possibly live here. My mom and I had always decided we wanted to either buy a old city hall, a old church, or old school building, and remodel it and have it as a cool home, because they're kind of cool buildings. Well, what we did was in when I was turning 50, I decided to have my midlife crisis and get myself a motorcycle. And then, needless to say, within a little bit of time and my obsessive compulsive behavior, I'm like, oh, I bought a 65 Harley, but I also like that bike. And then I like that bike. So I needed a garage. So I went online and looked for a church with a garage. And this one came up. And I'm like, oh, great. So I went there, and long story about it. It's really cool because it was like providential of me getting this church. Prices dropped, couldn't get the loan on it, got the loan on it after having a dream where I should go get the loan. Just weird. But so I get to the point where I get this church in 2018 and nothing happens. I'm moving some stuff in, just painting the walls, doing things like this. And then I start remodeling the bathroom downstairs because it was mildewy and moldy. And as soon as I started remodeling, my foot went through the floor. I'm like, oh, yeah, this needs to be remodeled. So I had to remove the flooring. I had to remove the walls. Then I had to remove the ceiling. So it was like a total remodel in that bathroom. And that's when things started happening, where I was laying downstairs. I have a couch bed that I bought from Amazon that folds out. And my 2 dogs, one was laying by my ankle, and my big dog lays by my armpits. And all of a sudden, she gets up and she puts her throat on my throat and starts to growl. And I'm like, get down. What is it? And I look at the clock and it's like 3:10 in the morning. What's up with that? And I put her down, and no problem. So I go to bed the next day, and once again, my dog puts her throat on my throat, starts to growl. I'm like, get down. And I look, and it's 3:10 again in the morning. I'm like, what is with the 3:10 in the morning? And I'm like, why is it so hot in here? I went over, the thermostat was turned all the way up. Like, that's weird. But I'm thinking, okay, that I know I don't sleepwalk, but what's up? So the next day, the same thing happened. 3:10 in the morning, the dog's growling, putting her throat on my throat. I end up pushing her down, going, slow down. And the fourth day this happens, 3:10 in the morning again. And then I'm thinking, okay, they just put in a new water meter. It's a smart meter. Maybe it's putting off a frequency or a high pitch. But at 3:10 in the morning, the fourth day, the light turns on in the back room. Now I had put in motion sensor when you walk in, the lights turn on. I'm like, okay. And there's only one entrance into that room, and that I could see it from where I was. So I know no one walked through. I had a 5-pound dog. I'm putting 5-pound dog on, trying to get her to trip the electronic lights. Nothing. Tried my bigger dog, and I'm like, go. And she's not tripping. I'm like, okay, what tripped that thing? I'm like, okay, maybe it's electrical again. Maybe the water meter's just setting off this type of electrical. Thermostats, electrical. Then you're thinking the light in the background, electrical. No problem. I'll probably call the water company. So every time I come into the church, I'm like, hi, church, bye, church. Something I just do. Silly. And one time I'm walking through the area, and I'm like, bye, church. And the rocking chair starts rocking on its own.
This was a preview of today's member episode. If you like what you heard and you want to hear more of it, go to theconfessionalspodcast.com, become a member if you're listening on the podcast feed. And if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and click the join button or the link in the description, and you can become a member today on YouTube and get this show.